What's up, guys? Been a long time since I posted a video. You know that they were coming a little more frequently, and then we hit the Ashvane wall. That is the nightmare of Mythic Lady Ashvane. She's just very, very, very tight DPS-wise. We are choosing to two-phase the boss, so we do 2 shield phases and 2 damage phases, and then she's dead. A lot tighter of a DPS check there. I've been trying to pump out as much DPS and healing spec as I can. Other healers are as well. We last night had a 6% wipe, and it was rough. It was really rough. We thought we would have had it. We had good coral spawns. The RNG, as far as that's concerned, was on our side. We just lost a DPS, and we didn't realize that we had a res. That's on the healers. We've been the ones calling out when we have that, and we just missed it. I think everybody was a little tense, a little tight, because we actually made it to that phase with 19 people alive. It was really rough to not hit that check. We're confident that we'll get it on Thursday. Don't want to jinx us, but in the meantime, I was thinking, you know, I still want to make a video for everybody, and I want to make something that hopefully the community can use. And I got to thinking, you know, there's not a whole lot of current guides out there for Vuhdo. I did a quick search earlier today, and you know, one of the more current guides is 7 years old, and there's never anything specific to Holy Paladins. So I thought I'd go ahead and make a video about setting up Vuhdo if you've ever wanted to try it, or if you're kind of tired of your raid frames, be it you know, just the standard WoW UI, which is very adequate. A lot of people use the standard WoW UI. Their raid frames are fine now. They've got a lot of good built-in functionality that Vuhdo and Grid and God, if you remember this long ago, Healbot used to have, or still do have. They've added into the default frames for WoW. So this guide, while it will be specific to Holy Paladins, I think any healer can use it. I've been using Vuhdo since Cataclysm. I prefer it over every other healing add-on. Yeah, I think it's good. Let's jump into World of Warcraft. All right, so we're in World of Warcraft. This is Vuhdo. If you've never used any other healing add-on, I know Grid 2 is very popular. I think even the original Grid is very popular. I believe Preach uses either Grid or Grid 2. Those are fine. There's nothing wrong with, those are just unit frames, but there's nothing wrong with them. You can just have those unit frames and then mouse over macro all your spells that you want, and you're good. Vuhdo essentially does what Healbot used to do. I say used to. I don't know anybody personally that still uses Healbot. That was the first healing add-on I ever used when I made the decision, God, almost 10 years ago now, to become a healer. I started with Healbot, and then I moved to Vuhdo. I haven't looked back since. I've been using it since Cataclysm, like I said. The problem with Vuhdo is that it's so advanced in its appearance, and its setup is clunky, and its user interface is not very user-friendly. A lot of people download it and just kind of say, hey, it's not for me. The user interface is clunky. It's not user-friendly, which is what an interface should be. It's very advanced in what you can do as far as setup, and it's very customizable, which is why I like it. And it also takes the place of having to write mouse over macros. I've never made mouse over macros. There's a lot of people that prefer that, and that's totally fine. Or they'll use Grid and they'll pair it with something like Click, not C-L-I-C-K, but C-L-I-Q-U-E, Click. They'll pair it with that, and basically they're using 2 add-ons to do one thing, and I just got disconnected from the servers. That's fun. All right, sorry about that, guys. Disconnected. Had to reconnect. My apologies. So back to the user interface of Vuhdo. To a new healer especially, hey, somebody's like, I'm new to the game. I just want to get into healing. This is kind of a lot to look at and really know what you're doing. You've got all these different operation modes, filters, panels, scanners, threat, AoE advice. What does all this mean? So what I want to try to do is try and simplify this. Again, this is going to be geared towards specifically Holy Paladins, but I think any healer can use this, especially some of the more advanced things like bouquets. I think it should hopefully be good for a lot of people. So in the general panel, this is where you're going to get to say, hey, I want to lock the panels, or I only want to lock them in a fight, or I never want to lock them. I don't recommend never locking them because that means mid-fight you'll be able to move the panel. You don't want to do that. So I always just lock the panels where I've got them, and then they're always locked in fight. But you can add these different filter groups if you want. A lot of people play with main tanks. They always want the main tank set. I don't mess with that. I always know where my tanks are based off of the icon they receive in Vuhdo. I believe that the standard WoW frames also do that. I don't think Grid or Healbot did. Scanner used to be important. Vuhdo used to be really, really cool. This is pre-Legion. It might even be towards the end of Warlords. I stopped playing in Warlords, so they might have fixed this then. But Vuhdo used to have an arrow indicator for when a target was out of range. Let's say I want to target this Frostwolf Grunt. You can see he's in range right now. I can Holy Shock him. I can Flash of Light him. Let's move out of range. I have a range indicator here. Let's just get out of range of this guy. Notice I'm clicking him. I'm trying to cast. I can't cast. He's too far away, or he's line of sight. Vuhdo used to have an arrow that would point you in the direction of your target, and then you could actually know where they are. So instead of them just being grayed out and out of range, you actually got a leg up on other healers because you had an arrow pointing you to where that person was. Now they've done away with that, but it's still okay. I still prefer this add-on both for its look and its features. So you can adjust certain things by range. I'm not going to worry about threat or AoE advice, especially for Holy Paladins. We have one AoE spell, which is Light of Dawn, but you're never going to cast that on anyone because it's just an instant cast heal. You should just be spamming it whenever the raid needs it. One of the things I do want to talk about in the general panel is something very powerful called bouquets. I've got a couple of bouquets. I've got one for tank cooldown. So my Beacon of Light is up there, as my tanks call it. So I've got a tank cooldown one. This none of these are active. Just the Beacon of Light is active. But what's the most important one for a Holy Paladin right now? That would be Glimmer of Light. Now I used to track Glimmer just via the debuffs panel, which is right here under custom, and we'll get to that panel in just a moment. I've since moved this to just become a bouquet that's custom. A, it's smaller, and B, when an actual debuff does show up that I am tracking, Glimmer of Light won't get in the way of that debuff. Still need to see Glimmer, but it won't intrude over another debuff that might need its slot. So I've actually moved it to a custom bouquet. I've also got a new one that I'm setting up because, again, since we're on Ashvane and it is a very, very demanding fight, there are 5 rippling waves that our team has to deal with. And by team, I mean the healing core. The first wave, our Disc Priest is going to cover with his cooldowns. I cover the second wave with my cooldowns. The third wave, our Disc Priest covers. The fourth wave is where I Devotion Aura. That's also where we pop external raid cooldowns like Rallying Cry and Darkness. The fifth has been the most difficult for our raid to get past without losing 1, 2, or 3 people. If we lose 1 and we have a battle res, it's not a big deal, but you need 20 people alive for the strat that we're using. I'm covering the 5th Rippling Wave with Wings and Avenger. Our Disc Priest is popping Barrier, and I have the entire raid pop Personals, pop Health Stones, and Health Pots, provided they have them. Health Stones and Health Pots don't share a cooldown like they used to, so you can pop one and then pop the other, and that's good for the fight. So you should, hopefully your raid's always utilizing that. They should always be asking the Warlock, bugging him for Health Stones, because you definitely need it for this fight. But as you can see, I've got custom bouquets set up now for every single personal cooldown in the game, well, for classes that have them. So what I wanted to do is go ahead and show you guys how to set up a new bouquet within one. Now I'm going to just add one here, but you could, if you wanted to, make a new bouquet and just type new, and this is your bouquet here, and like we could do Rallying Cry. Now this will be for externals, right? So I want to see Rallying Cry every time it's out on the raid. I can add it and it's there. Did I spell that right? Rallying Cry. We want to set this default icon to none so that just the game icon shows up, or the actual icon of the buff shows up. And then we'll add another one here. We'll call it Darkness because demon hunters are so edgy. And we'll remove the third one. So these are just two externals. Darkness doesn't have a debuff. I'm sure it'll be fine. If it doesn't, when Darkness is out, it'll just be a white icon. When it doesn't have the icon stored in Vuhdo, it'll just default to a white icon. If I wanted to make a new bouquet under my personals, now again, I created this. This isn't in Vuhdo by default. I always do that. Divine Protect. And I always spell divine wrong. Divine Protection. There's my personal cooldown. We've got Icebound from DK's, Anti-Magic Shell, Bark Skin, Iron Bark. These are this is an external. Got a couple externals in there. I put it in the personals just because I like to track that, mainly because if I've got an external or a tank needs an external, 9 times out of 10, all our healers will just, you'll see Life Cocoon, Pain Suppression, Guardian Spirit all come out on that tank. So he's just an invincible monster for that entire duration. And it's like, well, I probably don't need to Aura of, or a Blessing of Sacrifice that tank now. So let's add the Warrior personal cooldown, which I believe is called Die by the Sword. We'll set the icon to none, and we'll add it. I messed up Divine Protection again. Divine Protection is there. Die by the Sword is there. And let's make the icon, the game icon. We'll remove the 16th one. Sorry about that. They can't spell reflect in Arms or Fury, and they can't shield wall. Obviously, that's a tank spec. But Die by the Sword is a personal they can use. Not going to help them much on Ashvane, but, you know, again, this is just a list just to see who pops what when. Maybe I don't see Die by the Sword on Ashvane, but maybe I see it on a different fight where they need to increase their dodge and parry chance because they're getting meleeed by a boss, and that would tell me as a healer, hey, I just saw Die by the Sword get popped. I should probably spam the warrior. Maybe he's pulling threat, or maybe he charged in too fast. So either way, I'll show you how to get you guys how to apply these when we get to the panels section. But right now, we're just going to focus on the spells section. Now, I recently just rebound my 2 most used spells in Vuhdo. Since Cataclysm, I have always used shift left button for Holy Shock. That's where it's lived. Since 2011, I think is when I started playing the game. It's always been there. We never had a problem with it in Raid, but I had a problem with it from a feel perspective. I felt like I wasn't getting Holy Shocks out fast enough. So that kind of made me reevaluate where my keybinds are, where my mouse, this is essentially just setting up mouse over macros for you, where those live within Vuhdo. And I decided to go ahead and make Holy Shock left click. Holy Shock's your most used ability. Holy Shock is what applies Glimmer of Light to all your targets. So handicapping myself by having to hold shift, and I know it's like you're holding shift, that's not really a handicap. In a burst damage situation, misclicking somebody, Flash of Light used to be bound to left button, I moved it to right button. Misclicking and trying to Flash of Light them when I should be Holy Shocking them, I'm not going to stop the cast of Flash of Light because for the rule of healers, always be casting. You need to just see the cast through. Just finish it. Flash of Light's a 1.4 second cast, it'll be done. But that's a wasted global, and Holy Shock was off cooldown. I could have healed them faster. So I moved Holy Shock to the left button just so that I could get it out faster. I personally make Flash of Light right button because you're going to be Flash of Lighting often. You don't really use the Infusion of Light procs that you get, but if you don't have a Holy Shock available and you don't have a Light of Dawn available, then you might as well use that Infusion of Light proc on the Flash of Light because it's going to heal for more. There's also times in Raid where you just have to start spamming people. They're low, everything's on cooldown, you don't have wings, you're begging your neck to proc Vision of Perfection and it just won't. And so you're kind of left with nothing to do. You might as well spam Flash of Light and get something out there. Well, Glimmer should be top, Holy Shock, Light of Dawn after that, Beacon of Light should be in there somewhere, and then as far as casted abilities goes, Flash of Light, you might get 10 to 12 flashes off in a fight if you're doing good. If we look at logs of, say, our Commander Savara kill, and I click on me, I only casted Flash of Light 4 times. So you really want to just be using your instant cast abilities. But again, what you never want to cast, and what I see a lot of Paladins and logs doing, is they spam Holy Light for the mana. They're scared they're going to run out of mana and they start spamming Holy Light. Or they get an Infusion of Light proc and they say, well, instead of casting Flash of Light for mana, I'm going to go ahead and cast Holy Light. You never want to cast Holy Light. When we played the old build for Avenging Crusader, you wanted to do that for a mana conserve. We don't run out of mana. We are mana gods. We never run out, and if you play a Blood Elf, you get an extra 3 to 12% mana, depending on if you're Arcane Torrenting on cooldown. You don't need mana. You don't need to worry about it. So Holy Light is bound to shift right-click for me. Light of the Martyr is an instant cast spell. It's bound to shift left-click for me. We should also never be casting Light of the Martyr. Just looking at logs for my Savara kill, our farm Savara kill, I didn't cast Light of the Martyr 1 time. Light of the Martyr, it hurts you, and it only heals for a little bit, making it a very mana inefficient spell because you don't get any net healing out of it. You're hurting yourself, you're kind of helping an ally, but you're burning mana because the net gain, somebody's got to heal you, or you've got to heal yourself. Oh, you can see an old trinket in here was bound to mouse wheel up. You can get rid of that, I don't have that trinket anymore. For control left click, that's my Dispel. Probably be a little less clunky, but again, I just have always had it here since Cataclysm. So I hold control, I clicked and left click, it's gonna pop a Dispel on someone. Control right click is Lay on Hands. Since that's an oh shit spell, I don't want it bound to say middle mouse button. I want to use it for oh shit healing needs, and so that's why it's bound to control right, which is a little clunky, but again, I'm not casting Lay on Hands all that often. You want to try to use it once a fight. If you haven't used it because nobody's needed it, just spam it on somebody at the end of the fight, but it doesn't need to be your main healing ability. I have Beacon bound to my middle mouse button, so I just click the scroll wheel in, the tanks get the beacon. So if we close this, I don't have a unit frame shown because I use Vuhdo as my unit frame. If I was in DPS spec, you would see a little unit frame over here on this side, but I don't use that when I heal because I can see my health, I can see everything I need to right here in Vuhdo. But let's say that I need to target somebody. Specifically, I need to target somebody to pop an external on them. One thing I've not figured out how to do in Vuhdo, and if anybody knows how and they want to leave a comment in the comment section, this is something that's kind of baffled me for years, and so I've kind of always done it this way, at least since Mist of Pandaria, when I kind of started to get a little bit better at healing. You cannot bind Blessing of Sacrifice to a button. So let's say I wanted to make Blessing of Sacrifice, shift middle mouse button. And I've got this guy here, and I hit shift middle mouse button. Well, he's not getting Blessing of Sacrifice on him. I'm shift clicking him. Let's pull up the action cam. So I'm shift clicking on this guy, and I'm not getting anything on him. But you can see the mouse cursor is illuminated. So the mouse cursor wants to cast Blessing of Sacrifice, but Vuhdo's not allowing it to cast Blessing of Sacrifice. The only way I found to work around this, now this doesn't happen on other externals. Ironbark, Guardian Spirit, Pain Sup, all of those can be bound in Vuhdo and they work. It's just Blessing of Sacrifice, and I think that's because it's an odd external in that you're sacrificing your own health to keep somebody else alive, and it does actually count for a heal. But you can pop Blessing of Sacrifice on somebody, so if I'm at 100% health and they're at 30% health, I'm going to transfer 30% of my health. Let me rephrase that. I pop Blessing of Sacrifice on them, 30% of the damage they take is going to be redirected to me. So I'm going to start taking damage at that point. So I don't know if it's that aspect in that you're receiving damage and therefore it's just a weird type of spell, or it's a different type of aura. It's not just a blanket spell that you cast and you forget about it that's preventing that. But what I've found to work around that is on a normal unit frame, and actually on Vuhdo by default, when you right click or left click somebody, that targets them. I don't like target to be left click. I need that to be Holy Shock or a healing spell that I can actually get output out of. So you still want to be able to hard target your allies. The way I do that is with the mouse wheel, and that's mouse wheel up. So if I hit mouse wheel up, I'm now targeting myself. If I click this guy, he's not in my raid, so I obviously can't scroll up on him. But if I click this guy, and let's say that he is in my raid frames, I can mouse wheel up, and then I have Blessing of Sacrifice bound to middle mouse button. It might not work for him. It might work on this guy, though. Yeah. Unfortunately, I don't have an ally who is in party that's taking damage right now. You can't sacrifice a training dummy, and you can't sacrifice an NPC, but you can sacrifice yourself to an ally. But either way, I would scroll up on the mouse wheel to target them. I would then move my mouse cursor up a little bit to get off of Vuhdo, and I would press the middle mouse button key. So press the scroll key, and that would, boom, put the external on them. That's very clunky, but again, if anybody knows how to fix that in Vuhdo, I'm all ears. I've just never seen a way to solve it. There was a thread back in Mist of Pandaria about binding a mouse over macro to it. I never could get the mouse over macro to register in Vuhdo though. So if anybody out there that's smarter than me that wants to drop some knowledge, I am all ears. Down on the mouse wheel is Blessing of Freedom. This is nice for when people get rooted. Think Freehold when Rat Traps comes out. If you're tracking Rat Traps and somebody gets rooted, boom, mouse arrow down, they've got Blessing of Freedom. They can go about their business and run away. Blessing of Freedom is really nice to have bound to mouse wheel down. The cons of having it is sometimes you want to target someone and it doesn't register immediately like you want it to, and you'll end up Blessing of Freedoming them. But it doesn't happen all that often. I use Control Shift left button to bop someone. Bop isn't as bad as it used to be in that when you used to bop somebody, I think up until Warlords of Draenor, bop would prevent them from doing physical damage. So if you bop the spellcaster, no big deal. Spellcasters, though, generally aren't taking melee damage. They're not taking physical damage, which is all bop protects against. So who needs it? Well, tanks would need it. DPS would need it if they're getting meleeed. Well, you would bop them, and then, hey, they can't attack anything, none of their abilities work, then they get mad at the Paladin. Bop is something that does have utility if you're progressing on a Shara, for instance, and someone doesn't get out of the middle in the first phase, and they get beckon, and they get bubbled. Boom, they're bubbled. You can bop them out of the bubble. You don't have to have your DPS switch. You can just bop them out. Bop will remove debuffs from players. So that's why I have it bound. What's another one? Stormwall Blockade. The volatile lightning, or was it crackling lightning? Crackling lightning. This crackling lightning does a lot of damage, and it also puts a silence effect on the entire raid. So what people were doing in our group is they would just move out with crackling lightning, wait for it to fall off, and then they would come back to the group. We found out that you could just bop that off of them, and they would be prevented from taking any of the debuff damage because it was bopped off. So bop does have utilities still. You need to check with people before you do it though. Tell them that you're going to science something to see if it gets rid of a debuff. Never bop a tank because they will lose all threat instantly because they cannot be meleeed by the boss. And they're going to do one of two things. They're going to go to the secondary tank that maybe was trying to drop stacks, or they're going to go straight to a melee. So don't bop tanks unless they specifically call for it. I don't use alt ever. That's my healing setup. That's how I get healing out. Just a couple of quick button mashes. You can change your keys, your bindings. You can enable trinkets if you want. And you can set up certain clicks for hostiles. I don't have any buttons set for hostiles because I would just use keybinds to do DPS, not Vuhdo. but you could do that if you wanted to. You can change if you want Smartcast to resurrect somebody, battle res somebody. We don't have a battle res, so it obviously doesn't deal with us, but you can check out all these things if you want. I don't touch anything beyond just the mouse. Again, if I had a cool healing trinket, I could trigger something in here, but I don't have any cool healing trinkets. I do have Luminous Jellyweed, so I guess that's cool. We're not going to talk about the buffs panel. We'll go straight into debuffs. And here you can see is where I used to track Glimmer of Light. I don't track Glimmer of Light there anymore. Let me get rid of the action cam. I track Glimmer of Light via bouquet now, but used to, when it was a debuff, it would pop up a big icon, which you probably saw when you saw the highlights from the Ashvane kill earlier. It was a very large icon right here. This is going to be important because not all debuffs are tracked by default, especially raid debuffs. There are certain things that you want to know about that Blizzard, Vuhdo, whoever isn't going to let you know by default unless you specifically request it. One of those things for Ashvane, since that's the current boss we're fighting, is waterlogged. I need to know when somebody has waterlogged. When they hit a Rippling Wave bubble, they're going to be debuffed the rest of the fight with that. They're going to need extra healing. They're taking 26k damage a tick every single, what is it? It's every 3 seconds, I think. What we need to do is make sure that our waterlogged targets now have a glimmer on them. That way, anytime I holy shock somebody, they're receiving extra healing. A good one for last tier that we used to track, because it was really, really tough when we were progressing on it, was Cry of the Fallen from the Conclave. Anytime you would kill one of the Conclave members, they would release this raid-wide dot called Cry of the Fallen that would do a lot of damage. Do I need to track that necessarily to see how much damage it's doing? No, but what I did track it for was the duration. I wanted to make sure and see, okay, 6 seconds. We need big damage reductions. We need big CDs right here. And then, if it's got to, as it's timing out, what would happen is you would get a Paku's Wrath coming in right as Cry of the Fallen's going out. Okay, we need way more healing now because Paku's is going out. We're taking raid-wide damage. We've got a dot ticking. It's just one of the things that I chose to track. Bwansamdi's Wrath, when we were progressing on Rastakhan, to let me know if people were being bad and standing in Bwansamdi's death aura. You can do something as simple as what I did and just type the debuff here, or you can get fancy and find the actual spell ID and put it there. There's a couple of debuffs that I actually did that for, just to see which one would work. I've always found that just typing the debuff name has worked. There are specific instances where it doesn't, and you might have to go find that unique spell ID, but they're usually not that hard to find. You can find it on Wowhead. You could even probably find it in your class Discords, or Questionably Epic usually has pretty good raid guides. Dvorak Gaming has good healing guides. He usually always at least provides the debuff name so you can search for it on Wowhead, things like that. So let's get into the panels section. This is where you're going to do the bulk of your work once you get your healing spells set up properly and you get the bouquets that you want to track. The panels section is where you're going to make Vuhdo look like the way you want it to look. And so you can do horizontal or vertical. I always choose to align my panels horizontally. That means that groups are going to be shown from left to right, not up and down. I always set my max columns to 10 and my max rows to 8. 8 because there's a max of 8 groups that the game will allow you to have if you're in a 40-man raid. I always do grouped instead of loose. Loose will just put your raid members wherever they fall. Grouped will always show them in their proper group. So what does that look like in practice? Well, if I'm in a 20-man raid, this is what my raid frames would look like. You can see that this is group 1. I always know that this is group 1. This is group 2, 3, and 4. I sort my raid frames with tanks first, then melee DPS because they need to be prioritized. Ranged DPS are next, and then healers are last. Healers are always last for me because we can heal ourselves. If you get into a pinch, you're a healer. Figure it out. From the sizing, you can change the height and the widths, the gaps that are in between the bars, the spacing that's in between the bars. I have stuff real tight and then stretched slightly. I would stretch it beyond this, in all honesty. The problem is, in a 40-man raid right now, you can see that I get cut off at the bottom of my screen. I'm not in a whole lot of 40-man raids, and if I am doing something that is 40-man, it's generally I'm DPSing because it's like a world boss, and in which case my panels end up on the right or the left-hand side of my screen anyways because I'm not healing. The way my panels are set up is good for 30-man content because the 30th person or group, group 6 will always be just towards the bottom of my screen. And I don't make it much bigger than that because realistically, I'm not doing anything more than 30 if I'm doing group content, again, with the exception of world questing. But you can play around with the bar width and height however you want. This is just how I have mine set up. Under bars, this is where you can choose to either make your frames all green or use a class color or use a solid color. I can't remember who it was exactly. I think it was Method Josh back when he did a setup guide for Vuhdo way back when, but you always want to see the class that you're healing. You don't want to have to take a guess. Now, maybe you've been with your team for a long time and you just know everybody and you know what they play, but what happens if they re-roll and they don't want to play rogue anymore, they want to play mage? Well, I always want to see the class that I'm healing specifically, not just a green bar. I healed like this for a long time with just green bars everywhere. It makes more sense to see class colors, in my opinion. You don't have to do that. The bar texture, I do Vuhdo plain, but you can make the bars look however you want, however fancy or not fancy. Flat used to be cool, but then they added this gradient to it, and then they replaced it with plain. Plain has no gradient, has no gloss. It's just a box, just a brown box for warriors, a yellow box for rogues. So nothing special. A lot of people dead in this Vuhdo frame. Let's see if we can get some different panels going. Headers. I disable headers because, again, I know that this is group 1, group 2, group 3, group 4, group 5, because that's the way I have my panels set up. I could show those groups if I wanted to, and you could see it. But when you do a horizontally aligned grouping, you don't ever see the group number anyways. I don't like vertical aligned groups. I used to do that, but I've since kind of been converted to horizontal is superior. But again, you're not really easily able to see your groups, so that's why I disable the header. I just want a nice, sleek panel, and I already know where the groups are. You can really get specific with text on your bars and your positioning of your text, but I'm not going to get into that. What I do want to get into, because I said that we would, is where the hell do I apply these bouquets? You had me set up all these bouquets and I don't know what the hell to do with them. Well, the hot icon section is where you would do that. So you can see that you've got all these different slots. Icons are going to be shown on the left. I could also, let's beacon of light myself. Actually, let's beacon of light our target dummy real quick. So now you can see the target dummy has beacon of light. I could change where that icon is. I could put it there, put it there, put it there, put it just outside. I could put it just inside. I've always liked beacon of light to be shown right there. So where our personal is going to go? Well, they're going to occupy different slots. So if slot 1 is priority, beacon of light is always a priority for me. I need to have a tank beaconed. I need to see it first. If you're running a double beacon, which you won't if you're a Glimmerdin, then beacon of faith should be second. After that, this is my bouquets. And this is where I created my personals. So now those bouquets are going to occupy what's called slot 3. Glimmer occupies slot 4. And again, that goes back here. Glimmer is here. This is the bouquet that I made for it. Personals is here. These are all the bouquets that track everyone's personal cooldowns. Remember, we made a new one. What did we call it? We called it Make New, I think. Yeah, Make New. We can... I'd actually like to rename this, but for the purpose of the demonstration, since it's got Rally and Darkness, I'll keep it under Panels and Hots. Under slot 5, we'll put Make New there. So now if anybody pops Rallying or Darkness and they're under the effects of those, it'll show up in slot 5. Well, what does that look like in practice? Well, let's say I've got Beacon of Light on myself. I would never have Beacon of Light on myself, but just for the purpose of this, let's say I do. Glimmer of Light goes out because I Holy Shocked. You can see that that's now occupying slot 3. Let's say I pop Divine Purpose because there's mega damage coming in. Boom, there's the bouquet right there in slot 3 where it should be. That's going to be for any class. Now, not every class has access to Divine Purpose, but Death Knights have access to Icebound Fortitude. It's going to occupy that space right next to Glimmer. It's nice to see that type of stuff because A, you can see who's actually using personal cooldowns in your raid, and B, somebody's got a big personal on them, like a Life Cocoon, a Pain Suppression. They don't really need healing right then. You can heal other priority targets. They've got externals, don't worry about them. I'm sorry my phone went off. Under colors, you can change the colors of curses, poisons, diseases, magic. You can make custom colors. You can set the modes that you want for certain things like shields, power bars if you want to track those, hots if you want to track those. I don't really touch the colors panel. I like the default colors of Vuhdo. Under tools is where you can do your profile management. You can see my profile is called 5 to 25 man healer. That's because it looks best in 5-man content. Test. This is what it would look like if I was doing a 5-man. To 25-man, this is what it would look like in a 25-man. I've since upped this to 30, so it looks good now in 30. It used to not look good in 30-man content, but I've since fixed that. Maybe you only do Mythic, and you only care about Mythic, and you never do LFR, you never pug raids that have 30 people. Maybe you want to make your bars only look good for 20-man. That's fine. Just go to the Panels tab and play with the sizing until it looks good for how you want it to. I will export my profile for anybody that might be interested, and I'll put it in YouTube under probably a pastebin, but I'll make that available for anybody. If they don't want to do all this work, it's already been done. I'll share my profile. Let me go ahead and save my profile. You can see that I actually have different profiles load for different things. So you can see 5 to 25 man, which is a separate profile that will load in Retribution and Protection. That will look different than my 5 to 25 man healer. My DPS default raid frames are always 5 to 25 man on all my other characters, and that puts my raid frames right over here where I don't need to see them. As a DPSer, I'm not as concerned with the healing. I guess if I'm a Paladin, I could off heal, but again, I'm not super concerned about it. So I have different profiles load for different things. And the move panel does exactly what it says. It moves stuff, and you can test the way it looks. So you can move a panel around and mix and match stuff. Let's say I wanted to add a panel, like the target panel over here isn't default. Well, I could just do a special target panel. Now I've got a new target panel. And I can, if this was obviously, if I was in a DPS set, I could set up click macros to DPS it. I don't know if that's technically against terms of service. I don't think it is since it's in the functionality, but why would you do that? Sometimes you want to see target. There are raid fights where you need to target NPCs. Temple of Sethrolus and BFA is a good example of that. But remember in the Ice Crown Citadel, there was that dragon that needed to be healed. Also in Mist of Pandaria, there was a dragon that needed to be DPS'd, and then it had a healing phase where the healers would have to go all out. There are different uses for adding panels. You could add main tanks there if you wanted to. Let's see, special main tanks. And then both your tanks would show up here if you wanted your main tanks to be separate. Again, I don't do that. I always know where my tanks are, and Paladins aren't necessarily tank healers. So that's how I have my setup. Hope this guide was hopefully helpful to some of you guys. I know it was a little long. Again, I haven't really seen a whole lot of current stuff on Vuhdo. I know that there's other options out there for healing, but I still really enjoy it. I think it's a really nice raid frame to heal with, and it's got the added benefit of having mouse over macros built into it, so you don't have to set those up. So it kind of just cuts a step out, and you can get some pretty sleek looking raid frames. There are even ways to make Vuhdo look like LVUI. So let's say you're an LVUI user like me, and you really want that LVUI look, but you don't want to mess with LVUI's raid frames. There's profiles that you can import from Vuhdo that will look like LVUI. So you get the look and the feel, but you get the functionality of Vuhdo on top of it. So either way, thanks for watching, guys. Hopefully next week I will have an Ashvane kill video up and an Ashvane Holy Paladin healing guide up, but until we get this monstrous boss down, just wish us some luck and keep us in your thoughts. Thanks, guys, for watching. Bye.